Emily Lawson stepped out of her government sedan and felt the morning chill brush against her face. The sun had just begun its climb above the tall embassy walls, painting long shadows on the driveway. She smoothed the lapel of her dark blazer, making sure her FBI badge hung clearly on the lanyard around her neck. Her sidearm rested in a shoulder holster beneath her jacket, but she kept her hand away from it. Today was supposed to be a simple security briefing, nothing more than a quick meeting to review safety plans. She told herself that as she walked forward, her heels clicking softly on the concrete. 2 palace guards stood at attention by the heavy oak doors. Their uniforms were dark and pressed, with silver buttons that caught the light. Straps crossed their chests, and their hats sat perfectly level on their heads. Emily watched them carefully. She had met palace guards before in her career, but she knew every post had its own rules. She raised her chin, steadied her breath, and approached the guard post with confidence. She believed her badge would be enough. As she drew near, the senior guard turned his head to face her. His eyes narrowed slightly, and he lifted a gloved hand in a quiet gesture that told her to stop. Emily paused a step away, holding her badge. Out at chest level, the morning air was cool, and she felt it fill her lungs as she waited. Behind her, the embassy grounds were quiet. Few diplomats walked by, and a security camera swiveled on its mount. Everything felt still, almost too still. The guard spoke, his words clear but carrying a thick accent Emily did not fully recognize. She listened for a moment, tilting her head. Then she realized he was refusing her entry. She frowned, surprised. She laid her badge against the glass of the small window in the guard booth, hoping that would help. She thought of the email from the State Department that confirmed her meeting. She had time, only a few minutes, but she believed anyone would trust a federal agent wearing an official badge.
Oh.
The guard shook his head and waved his hand. He pointed to a phone mounted on the wall inside the booth. Emily leaned forward, her hand still holding the badge, and met his gaze. She could tell he felt a duty to protect his post. She nodded to show she understood his caution, but she also needed him to understand her urgency. She spoke clearly. "I'm here for the briefing at 9. My name is Emily Lawson. I have orders from the State Department." She smiled politely, hoping to ease any tension. He stared at her badge again, then over at the embassy door. He picked up the phone receiver and pressed a button. Emily watched his lips move as he spoke quickly to someone she could not hear. It seemed like he was saying her entry was not possible yet. She felt a knot form in her stomach. Her meeting was minutes away, and she had to be inside. She drew a shaky breath, telling herself to stay calm. The guard still held the phone. His back was turned slightly, but he kept an eye on her without looking. Emily's heartbeat quickened as she realized the delay might spoil the briefing. She pulled her jacket closed, trying to make herself look less threatening. She shifted her weight from one foot to the other. She tried to calm her racing mind by reminding herself of the steps she had learned at the academy. Speak softly. Stay nonviolent. Look for a way to de-escalate. She considered offering to wait inside the booth, but she doubted that would solve anything. The guard would still have to call his superiors. She thought of calling her FBI partner for help. But her phone was in her bag inside the car, 20 feet behind her. She sighed inwardly. The guard ended his call and set the receiver back on its cradle. He opened his mouth as if to speak, but the embassy door swung open behind him. Security. Officer stepped out, clipboard in hand. He glanced at Emily, then at the guard. The officer nodded toward the guard and spoke in a softer voice. The guard looked hesitant, but then he turned back to Emily. His expression was polite but firm. He pointed again to the phone. Emily stared at him for a moment, her mind racing. She knew rules were rules, but she had to make her point. She raised her voice, but kept it calm and steady. "Sir, I respect your rules, but I have a federal appointment. I need to be inside." Her tone was respectful, but there was steel beneath her words. She kept her feet planted firmly on the ground. The guard bit his lip and swallowed. He gestured again, toward the phone, and said a few words in his language. The embassy officer shook his head and mouthed, "No." Emily felt frustration rise, like hot water in her chest. Her hand brushed the holster at her side. She froze, surprised by the urge. She closed her eyes and shook her head slightly, reminding herself not to act hastily. The guard was just doing his job. Her own training told her to find a peaceful solution first. But the seconds ticked by, and each one felt like a drumbeat in her ear. She glanced at her watch. The meeting would start in less than 2 minutes. She couldn't afford to miss the briefing. She needed to find a way in. Her mind flicked through options. She could call for backup. She could ask the embassy officer to vouch for her. She could leave and come back later. None of those options felt acceptable. She felt pressure building. Her breathing grew shallow. She forced herself to inhale slowly, lowering her shoulders. She would not lose control. She would not create a scene. But she needed action. In that moment, her training and her urgency collided. She made a quick decision. She reached for her sidearm, pulling it from the holster with her finger just outside the trigger guard. She brought it up to chest level, keeping it low and pointed at the ground. The sharp click of leather on metal was louder in the silent morning. The guard's eyes widened. Emily's heart pounded so hard she felt it in her throat. She spoke. Firmly, FBI, do not move. Her voice carried authority, edged with desperation. The guard froze immediately. His gloves tightened around his rifle strap. He did not raise his own weapon, simply stared, frozen in place. Emily took a careful step back toward the embassy door. She kept her weapon aimed, but low. She wanted to show she did not want to harm anyone. She just needed to get inside. Her hand shook slightly on the gun's grip. The palace guard pressed a button on his radio. The sound of static crackled through the receiver. Emily's other hand rose, palm open, a clear signal she meant no harm. She said again, I will not shoot. I need to get in for the briefing. Her words were met with silence. The guard's radio sputtered as he spoke into it. Emily watched his lips move, saw the guard's shoulders tense. She knew he was calling for backup. Behind her, the embassy door stayed open, the security officer waiting. Emily took a breath and hoped her colleagues would arrive in time. The guard still stared, gun to the guard's chest. Time felt suspended. At that moment, the air around the embassy seemed to hold its breath. Emily's desperation and authority met the guard's duty and confusion. She felt the weight of her badge, the weight of her gun, and the weight of the rules she had broken. She wondered if she had gone too far. She held her breath and waited for what would come next. Emily stood firm, her sidearm still drawn, watching the palace guard clamp his radio handset back onto the wall. She could see the guard's jaw move under his mask as he spoke into the radio, his eyes never leaving the gun pointed at his chest. Emily's heart thudded in her ears. Every second felt heavy, like a stone in her shoe. Behind her, the embassy door stayed open, and the security officer inside glanced nervously over his shoulder. Emily knew she could not remain here much longer. She needed help, and she needed it soon. Just then, a distant rumble of footsteps echoed down the marble path. Emily's breath caught. The guard stiffened, too, turning his head slightly to listen. From around the corner, more palace guards appeared, moving in tight formation. 6 of them, dressed in tactical gear rather than the formal uniforms at the entrance. Their rifles were slung across their chests. Their faces were set and serious. Emily's mind raced. She counted the seconds in her head. 3 minutes had passed since she drew her weapon. The palace tactical team closed the distance quickly, boots clacking on the stone. Their leader raised a hand, signaling them to halt just a few feet from the senior guard. The leader wore a dark helmet and a visor that reflected the early sunlight. He spoke in the same accent Emily had heard before, but his tone was sharper, more urgent. His men fanned out, creating a perimeter around the entrance. Emily saw the pause in their formation as an invitation. They had the advantage of numbers and position. Emily's grip on her sidearm tightened. She lifted her free hand, palm forward, to show she meant no further harm. I am FBI, she said, voice loud enough to carry over the distance. Please lower your weapons. I need to get inside for a State Department briefing. Her words rang out in the morning air. The palace guards did not lower their rifles. Instead, they shifted their weight, ready to respond. The leader spoke into his own radio, his voice clipped and urgent. Behind Emily, the embassy security officer stepped forward, raising his own hands. He mouthed something, but Emily could not make out the words. She recognized the man from her morning meeting schedule. He was the embassy's security chief, Carlos Mendez. Carlos had a calm face, framed by thick black hair. He had studied at the State Department's security program and knew Emily by reputation. She looked back at him and raised an eyebrow, asking silently for help. Carlos hesitated, then stepped fully into the doorway. He straightened his uniform jacket and spoke clearly to the palace team. "Agent Lawson is here with official clearance. You can verify with me." He held out an ID card with both hands. The leader of the palace tactical team glanced at the card, then back at Emily. The other guards' rifles did not move. Emily sensed that the palace team took orders only from their own officials and would not trust Carlos alone. Emily's mind leapt to her next move. She could try to reason further, but she worried that any delay might provoke a misunderstanding. Her gun still pointed downward, but she felt the weight of it. She pushed down the tightness in her chest and spoke again, more softly. "I'm not here to cause trouble. I only need to get inside." She took a small step forward, careful not to raise her weapon. The palace team mirrored her move, stepping forward to tighten their circle. Emily froze. In that tense moment, Emily remembered diplomatic protocol. Embassies remain sovereign territory. She had overstepped by drawing her weapon on a guard. She realized how badly this could go if any palace soldier felt threatened. The guard she faced was doing his duty, protecting his embassy. Emily's training told her to de-escalate, but her urgency had driven her instinct to force her way in. Now, she needed to correct her mistake. Emily took a steadying breath. She carefully lowered the barrel of her gun a few inches, aiming slightly to the side of the senior guard. She slid her finger off the trigger guard and rested it along the slide. She spoke in a calm tone. "I'm lowering my weapon. Please lower yours, and I will holster mine." The leader of the palace team glanced at his men, then back at Emily. He made a small hand signal. One by one, their rifles dropped, pointing down at the ground. Emily exhaled a breath she did not know she had been holding. The senior guard beside Emily also lowered his rifle, though he kept a firm grip on it. Emily took another step forward and holstered her gun. Her hand lingered on the grip for a moment before she slid it back into place. She felt a wave of relief, but also a fresh wave of embarrassment. She had created the standoff. She owed an apology not only to Carlos but to the palace guards. Carlos moved forward to close the gap between Emily and the palace team leader. Emily watched as they spoke quietly, the leader's hands gesturing at the embassy entrance, and then at Emily's badge. Carlos nodded and returned to Emily's side. He spoke in a low voice. "They still need confirmation from their embassy in the country. They must clear you with their foreign office." Emily closed her eyes briefly. She understood. She had rushed in without following local protocol. Emily faced the palace team leader and gave a respectful nod. "I'm sorry for my actions," she said, voice sincere. "I should have followed your rules. Can you please call your foreign office and confirm I have State Department orders?" The leader gave a curt nod. "What?" He raised his hand to signal one of his soldiers who stepped forward. That soldier retrieved a secure phone from a pouch and dialed numbers into it. Emily and Carlos waited, the palace team holding their perimeter. The sun climbed higher, shadows shifting on the driveway. Emily heard the click of embassy doors closing in the background and muffled voices from inside the building. Her ears were tuned to the palace soldier's side of the conversation. He spoke in measured tones, giving Emily's name and title, repeating the State Department reference. Emily felt her heart slow its racing pace as the call progressed. A pause followed, as if the soldier was on hold. Emily wondered if the Foreign Office had the right information. Carlos placed a comforting hand on Emily's shoulder. "You did what you thought was right," he said. But it's best we let them do this right." Emily nodded, grateful for his support. She watched the palace soldier lower the phone and glance at his leader. Turned back to Emily. He gave her a small smile. Emily could not help but feel hopeful. "Your orders are confirmed," the palace team leader said in broken but clear English. "You may enter for your briefing." He stepped aside and his team melted back into formation near the building's perimeter. The senior guard at the entrance offered Emily a slight bow. Emily gave him a brief nod in return. She stepped past him and into the embassy, Carlos at her side. Inside, the air felt different, warmer, calmer, filled with the low hum of conversation and the soft click of shoes on carpet. Emily breathed deeply, letting the tension ease from her shoulders. Diplomats and security staff paused their work to glance at her badge. Some gave a quick nod of respect, others simply returned to their tasks. Emily felt relief wash over her. She had made it inside and no one had been hurt. Carlos guided Emily to a small conference room down the hall. The door bore a brass plaque. That read "Security Briefing Room." Emily opened the door and stepped in, spotting her colleagues already seated around a polished oak table. They greeted her with worried looks. Emily offered them a small, tired smile. She knew she had a story to explain. As she took her seat, the palace guards stood at the back of the room, rifles slung, observing quietly. The palace team leader remained at the door. Emily felt a pang of respect for their vigilance. She owed them and her own country an apology and an explanation. She cleared her throat and began, "Thank you all for waiting. I'm sorry for the delay. Here's why I came today." Her voice grew steady as she launched into the purpose of the meeting. The tension of the morning began to fade as they turned their focus to the briefing. In that moment, Emily realized that her toughest lesson of the day was not about force or speed. It was about respect, protocol, and the power of a calm voice. She glanced at the palace team leader one last time, nodded in gratitude, and focused on the task at hand. The morning's drama had passed, and now real work would begin. Emily Lawson left the small conference room with a sense of relief mixed with lingering tension. The palace guards had relaxed their stance now that her orders were confirmed. But the echo of heavy rifles and clicking boots still lived in her memory. She carried her notes, gathered for the briefing, in a neat leather folder. As she walked down the hallway, each step felt slower than before, as if the marble floor itself tried to hold her in place. Her mind replayed every moment of the standoff, rewinding like a film she could not pause. She entered a larger room, where several senior officials waited. The State Department's Deputy Security Director, Michael Harper, stood at the head of a long table. His face was serious, but his eyes showed concern more than anger. Emily offered a respectful nod and took the seat beside Carlos Mendez. Other diplomats and security officers from the palace embassy filed in, their uniforms crisp. The air held the faint scent of coffee and polished wood. Everyone glanced at video monitors that showed the morning's events from different angles. On one screen, Emily saw the moment she drew her gun. Her heart tightened, watching herself raise the weapon. "Act!" The guard frozen mid-action. On another screen, palace units appeared, rifles slung, moving into position. She had seen it all happen in real time, but seeing it again from new angles felt different, felt heavier, more real. She noticed details she had missed before, a worried line on the lead guard's forehead, the shake in the radio operator's hands, the tense way Carlos Mendez kept glancing at her. The deputy security director spoke first, his voice calm. He thanked the palace officials for their patience and then turned to Emily. "Agent Lawson," he said, "we appreciate your service and your quick thinking under pressure. But we also need to understand why you felt the need to draw your weapon before exhausting all other options." Emily swallowed and offered a clear, steady answer. She explained how the guard's refusal to admit her, despite State Department orders, threatened the security briefing's timing. She spoke quietly of her training, her sense of duty, and the fear that the delay could leave the embassy vulnerable. She admitted, with sincerity, that she had made a mistake in not fully respecting the embassy's sovereignty. She spoke of her regret for any distress caused. The room was silent as she spoke. She could almost hear her own breathing over the quiet hum of the monitors. When she finished, one of the palace security officers, a tall woman with silver-streaked hair, leaned forward. She spoke kindly, her accent soft. "We understand your urgency, Agent Lawson. We too fear delays in critical security matters. Protocol exists to protect us all from misunderstanding that lead to worse outcomes." Emily nodded again and thanked the officer. The Deputy Security Director then opened the floor for suggestions. One of his aides proposed faster verification systems, secure digital channels, linking the State Department and the Foreign Embassy's home office. Another advisor suggested joint training exercises so palace guards and FBI agents could learn each other's protocols. Emily found herself speaking up, offering ideas she had gathered over her years on the field. She described simple steps like badges with scannable chips, pre-cleared lists sent daily to embassy posts, and translator, phones ready at guard booths. As the meeting proceeded, Emily felt the tension ease. Conversations shifted from blame to solutions. She watched the palace guards exchange thoughtful glances with her FBI colleagues. Carlos Mendez made notes, scribbling quickly on a legal pad. Emily realized that both sides truly wanted the same outcome: safety and clear communication. The memory of her hand shaking on the gun's grip felt painful now. But she also understood how that act had focused everyone's attention on the need for change. After nearly an hour, the Deputy Security Director brought the meeting to a close. He thanked all parties and asked palace guards to escort Emily to a waiting vehicle. The palace team leader approached her, offering a curt bow. Emily managed a small smile and said, "Thank you for your cooperation today." The leader gave a faint nod, then turned to signal his men. The rifles reappeared on their shoulders, but their posture was relaxed. Emily felt a quiet respect between them, earned through shared purpose. Outside the embassy, the afternoon sun shone brighter than the morning. Emily stepped into the shade of a large oak tree, inhaling the scent of warm grass. A black SUV waited. Nearby, Michael Harper walked with her, his suit jacket unbuttoned now, tie loosened. He placed a hand on her shoulder as they approached the vehicle. "You did well, Emily," he said, voice low. "You kept your cool when it mattered, and you helped forge better ties today." Emily nodded, grateful. She slid into the back seat and closed the door behind her as the SUV drove away. Emily gazed back at the embassy's tall walls. She recalled the early morning light, the rigid guards, and the soft click of her holster. She understood that her actions had forced a necessary discussion, even if the way she did it had been flawed. She thought of the palace security officers and how quickly they had moved to contain the situation. She felt respect for their commitment and discipline. In the days that followed, Emily's report went through various reviews. Her supervisors commended her for her decisive action, while also noting areas for protocol improvements. The Palace Embassy issued a public statement praising joint efforts to strengthen security cooperation. Both American and foreign diplomats referred to the incident as a catalyst for better systems, rather than a crisis point. Emily read the press coverage with mixed feelings, relief that the focus was on solutions and regret for the fear she had caused. On her flight home, Emily stared out the window at clouds glowing pink in the sunset. She held a printed copy of the new joint protocol draft in her lap. She thought about the palace guard whose radio call had started it all, the palace tactical team who surrounded the embassy, and her own choice to draw her weapon. She knew she would carry those memories with her, shaped now by reflection and lessons learned. And she vowed that next time she would first trust the power of communication before reaching for her gun. Emily returned to her field office in Washington, D.C., 2 days after the embassy incident. The sun was bright, the sidewalks busy, but her thoughts were quiet. She had a lot on her mind, things she couldn't easily let go. Her office was on the 4th floor, tucked away in a secure corner of the building. As she walked in, her team greeted her with careful smiles. Everyone had heard about what happened at the embassy. The story had already spread through the agency, though no one said anything unkind. Still, Emily could feel their curiosity. She nodded politely and entered her office, closing the door softly behind her. She placed her bag on the chair and looked out the window. Her reflection in the glass seemed more serious now. Emily had always been known for staying calm under pressure, for following protocol, and for building trust with international partners. But this time, even though no one was hurt, she had drawn her weapon in a place where diplomacy mattered more than action. It was not something she could forget. Later that morning, her supervisor, Special Agent Denise Harper, called her into a meeting room. Denise was known for being tough but fair. She wore a gray suit and had a firm voice that rarely changed tone. Emily respected her deeply. She entered the room. Denise gestured to a chair. "Sit, Emily. Let's talk." Emily sat, her hands folded in her lap. "I've read the full report," Denise began. "I've also watched the footage. You didn't act out of anger, and you didn't escalate things out of ego. But we both know that drawing your weapon outside a foreign embassy, even with good reason, comes with consequences." Emily nodded. "I understand." Denise leaned back in her chair. "You didn't fire. You didn't threaten. You gave verbal warnings. And in the end, you helped open up an important conversation between our agencies. That said, we're going to do two things. First, you'll take part in a short diplomatic protocol refresher. It's not punishment tits, just to make sure. We're always ready. Second, I want you to help write a case study for internal training, something agents can learn from." Emily blinked in surprise. "You want me to write about it?" "Yes," Denise replied, "because no one else lived that moment like you did. You know the pressure. You know the choices. And you know what worked and what didn't." Emily felt a deep breath rise in her chest. She had expected criticism or a quiet transfer. Instead, she was being given trust. "I'll do it," she said simply. The next few weeks were busy. Emily attended the refresher sessions, which reviewed international law, embassy rights, and the careful balance of power between U.S. agencies and foreign officials. She found the lessons helpful, even if some of the scenarios felt overly basic. She knew the importance of reviewing rules even when you already knew them by heart. Mistakes often happen not from ignorance, but from urgency. At the same time, she began working on the case study. She titled it 3 Minutes of Tension: Lessons in Respect, Timing, and Control. She described the events moment by moment, not to make herself look good, but to show the real emotions: uncertainty, pressure, fear. She wanted other agents to understand that being right on paper didn't always mean being right in the moment. She explained what she learned: the value of patience, the weight of a weapon, and the silent language of body posture. The case study spread quickly. Other agents emailed her with supportive messages. A few even shared their own near-miss stories moments when they had almost drawn their weapons or almost lost control. Emily replied to each message, thankful that honesty had opened doors instead of closing them. One day, while taking a break at a nearby coffee shop, Emily received an unexpected call. It was from a representative at the Palace Embassy. The woman on the phone introduced herself as Deputy Minister Farah Salim, someone Emily had not met in person. "I wanted to speak with you directly," Farah said. "I've read the joint reports. Start. I want you to know that your actions, while not perfect, reminded us all that communication must come first." Emily thanked her sincerely. "That means a lot. I never wanted to cause a scene. I just didn't want to fail my mission." "Didn't," Farah said. "And because of what happened, our embassy has reviewed our own procedures too. Our guards will now receive training on recognizing international law enforcement officers. We're also adding translator devices to the posts." Emily smiled. "It's wonderful to hear." There was a pause before Farah added, "And if you are willing, I'd like you to return to the embassy. It's not for another meeting, but for a small ceremony. We're organizing an event for international cooperation, and I believe you should be." There, Emily hesitated. The thought of returning to the same building, facing the same guards, made her chest tighten. But then she realized something important. She had been invited not as a symbol of a mistake, but as a sign of progress. "I'd be honored," she replied. The event was scheduled 2 weeks later. On the day of the ceremony, Emily stood once again outside the embassy gates. This time, there was no tension, no confusion. The senior guard she had once pointed her weapon at now greeted her with a respectful nod. He opened the gate without hesitation. She stepped through, feeling a sense of peace she hadn't expected. Inside, the halls were decorated with flags, floral arrangements, and small signs that read together, "Stronger." Representatives from multiple nations were present, men and women in suits and uniforms, speaking quietly, shaking hands, sharing stories of cooperation. Farah Salim welcomed Emily personally and walked with her into the event hall. During the ceremony, Emily was asked to speak briefly. She stepped up to the podium, adjusted the microphone, and looked around at the faces. Watching her, "I'm not here today because I handled everything perfectly," she began. "I'm here because I was given the chance to learn, to grow, and to work with others toward a better system. In those 3 minutes outside this embassy, I realized how fragile trust can be and how quickly it can be repaired if we're willing to listen." She paused, letting her words settle. "May we continue building that trust. May we speak before we act. And may we always remember that respect is the strongest tool we carry." She stepped down to a warm round of applause. As the evening continued, Emily stood near a refreshment table, speaking with diplomats and agents from around the world. One of the palace guards approached her, holding a small commemorative pin. "This is from our team," he said. "Give it to guests who make a difference." Emily accepted the pin with a humble smile. As she walked out of the embassy later that night, the cool evening breeze brushed against her skin. She looked up at the night sky, stars twinkling above the tall buildings. In that moment, Emily Lawson felt something she hadn't felt since the day of the incident. Lightness. She hadn't just been part of a standoff, she had been part of a turning point. And she knew that even the hardest moments could become bridges if handled with courage, clarity, and care. ChatGPT said, a month had passed since the tense morning at the embassy. Emily Lawson had gone back to her regular field duties, but something inside her had quietly changed. She still wore the same badge, followed the same rules, and sat through the same briefings, but now she looked at every situation with new eyes. The moment she had drawn her weapon, and the 3 long minutes that followed, had taught her that real strength didn't always come from force. Sometimes it came from standing still, thinking clearly, and choosing the harder road of peace. One afternoon, she received a call from the FBI's training division. They had read her case study and were impressed, wanted her to lead a session at the academy for new recruits, a real-world scenario lesson about handling high-pressure diplomatic situations. At first, Emily wasn't sure. She didn't see herself as a speaker. But after some thought, she realized this was another way to turn a tense mistake into a learning opportunity for others. The training session was scheduled on a sunny Friday morning. Emily walked into a large classroom filled with young agents in training. They looked sharp, full of energy, eager to listen and prove themselves. She introduced herself, then dimmed the lights and played video footage from the embassy incident. She'd let them watch the entire scene without speaking, starting from her first interaction with the palace guard to the moment the armed palace units surrounded the gate. When the lights came back on, the room was quiet. "Tell me, Emily," said, standing in front of the class, "at what moment do you think the situation could have taken a different turn?" Hands slowly rose. Some said it was when the guard refused entry. Others said it was when Emily raised her voice. Few even pointed to the instant she reached for her weapon. Emily nodded, listening to every answer. Then she said gently, "All of you are right, and none of you are wrong. But what really matters is not which moment was most critical, it's that we recognize how many chances we have to choose patience before we choose pressure." She shared how her training had taught her to stay alert, how she followed the rules, but also how her decision came from fear that she'd fail her mission. She explained that even though she was technically allowed to carry a weapon, it didn't always mean she should use it, not unless absolutely necessary. Sometimes, she said, you'll be the only person on the scene who knows both what the rulebook says and what your heart feels. It's your job to listen to both. At the end of the session, several trainees came up to thank her. One young man told her he had always believed that being brave meant taking quick action. "I understand that it can also mean waiting. A little longer, he said. Emily smiled. Exactly. Bravery wears many faces. That same week, the Joint Embassy Task Force invited her to attend their review meeting. It was held in a quiet room at the International Policy Building. She sat with both American and foreign representatives who had worked on updating the entry protocols for diplomatic properties. They showed her the changes that had already been made: scannable ID systems at guard posts, new translator apps on secure phones, and real-time messaging between embassy guards and U.S. field offices. One palace representative stood up and addressed the group. He was the same guard who had called in the emergency that day. Agent Lawson, he said in soft but steady English, we thank you. You helped us improve. You made us ask questions we had never asked before. Emily replied with gratitude. And you reminded me that patience is not weakness, it's control. After the meeting, she walked alone down the long steps of the building. The sun was beginning to set, and the sky had turned orange and gold. She paused for a moment, leaning on the railing, watching the cars move slowly along the street. She wasn't thinking about her job now. She was thinking about how close she had come to changing the course of that day for the worse. But instead, something better had grown from it. The next morning, she received an envelope in her office. Inside was a letter from the director's office and a small black box. The letter thanked her for her service, her honesty, and her role in building stronger international ties. Inside the box was a pinna silver circle with a symbol of two hands shaking over a globe. It wasn't a medal for bravery, it was something different. It was a reminder that peacekeepers didn't always stand on stages or wear bright medals. Sometimes they stood alone at embassy gates, facing uncertainty, and still made the right choice. A few weeks later, Emily received a message from Deputy Minister Farah Salim. She invited Emily to visit her country this time as part of a joint delegation on security training and international cooperation. The trip would include seminars, embassy visits, and panel discussions. At first, Emily hesitated. She wasn't sure she was ready to fly across the ocean and be a guest in a country where things had once gone so wrong. But the more she thought about it, the more she realized that growth doesn't happen in comfort zones. She accepted. On the day of her flight, she packed light, just one bag, her documents, and the silver pin carefully tucked in her coat pocket. The flight was long, but the view from the airplane window reminded her how big the world was, and how every small action could ripple far beyond what we see. When she arrived at the capital city, she was welcomed by local officials. They brought her to the same embassy she had once nearly entered by force. But now, the gates opened smoothly. The guards greeted her by name, and a new sign at the post read verified entry. State partners welcome. During her visit, Emily spoke at panels, met other agents, and walked through busy streets lined with markets and smiling children. She toured a training center where both American and palace security officers now practice side by side. She watched them drill, practice language skills, and learn from each other. She saw trust growing right before her eyes. At the end of the visit, Farah invited Emily to a quiet dinner on the embassy's rooftop. As they looked over the city lights, Farah said, "You came here under pressure. Now, you return with purpose. That's rare." Emily looked around at the peaceful scene, the soft sounds of the evening city, and smiled. Sometimes, she said, we find our purpose in the middle of mistakes. If we're lucky, we grow from them. As the night wind gently moved the curtains on the terrace, Emily realized her journey wasn't just about one mistake one morning or one embassy. It's about something far deeper, the quiet work of building bridges, not walls. And for the first time since that morning, she felt at peace, knowing she had done her part. Not just as an agent, but as a human being who chose learning over pride and peace over fear.